Jason, Ben, I want to thank you for introducing to me to Oz 10 years ago. Just to rewind, you're the origin story of us getting to know
Wow.
each other. Do you
I'm
remember
honored.
that?
I don't remember that specific moment, but that's
Okay.
awesome to
I
hear.
it was I had just finished Hack Reactor and I was interviewing at Minerva where you were working.
That's right.
And Minerva, just I still think that is one of the coolest companies out there, that whole idea. But I was in my interview, or maybe it was my first like intro chat because our buddy Mike works there. And you sat down with me very graciously. And then after that little chat, you're like, you are not ready for an interview here. And I was like, what are you talking about? I've been learning computer science for 3 months. I know I can do this. And you're
Yeah.
like, no, you're not. You got to talk to Oz. He will set you straight, which I did do, thank goodness. But then I also was like, you know what? I'm going to prove Jason wrong. I'm going to do the interview anyway. It did not work out. So you were right. You're right about both things. So thank you for that.
Man, our loss.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
I mean
Oz
that
set me
company
straight
was
too.
so cool.
It was really cool, but at that point, I had been like 2 years as a web developer, having graduated from dev bootcamp earlier, and
Mhm.
then subsequently getting pigeonholed into web dev until I met Oz, and he convinced me to take computer science seriously, and that was my path to being a competent software engineer. So
I'm
thanks.
still I'm I'm still on that path, I would hope. But yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Aren't we all though, Jason?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you know and Oz meet? What's that origin tale?
So I came to meet Oz through Miles, who was the fourth phase instructor at Dev Bootcamp when I was there in Chicago. And I had been in the market. I was like looking around for what does like intermediate level Dev Bootcamp look like? And I asked Miles, and he told me that he was planning a school with this guy Oz. And so I met you guys through like your tutoring before you were before you had officially founded Bradfield when you were just planning curriculum. So I'm super lucky to be that early.
Yeah, we alpha tested. Actually, Charlie, were you in on
I
this?
was in
We
that too,
alpha
yeah.
tested,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
our
right.
curriculum basically through one-on-one, and that is a good way to confront whether your ideas about what's worth learning and teaching are going to work.
Mm.
There is the additional challenge of scaling that to larger groups, but uh, yeah, we all have no doubt that teaching one-on-one is a good lesson for the student, good lesson for the teacher as well. We
Yeah.
got to talk about AI tutors and all that stuff, Jason, because I know you and I have different opinions on that. But like both, I think both like well thought out opinions. So I'm keen to hear your like direct experience. I know you're continuing
Yeah.
to experiment with AI tutors.
Yeah.
And like I'm also eager to like update my beliefs about this as we
Wow,
go.
okay. This is nice. Growth mindset.
Let's talk about
Sounds like a
that. And
great
let's talk
conversation.
about Minerva as well
Yeah.
at some
Sure.
point. But should we give more context on Jason
Yeah.
so people who are listening know why he's here?
Jason, you're a man of many talents. I've been like that. We haven't caught up too much, but before this, we were just riffing on your experience figuring out co-living in San Francisco. But I know that you've traversed down the machine learning engineer, the MLE route quite a bit. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you've been up to, I guess, in the last 10 years.
Yeah. So over the last 10
Actually,
years,
wait. Sorry,
yeah.
not to interrupt. I want to hear this too, but can I give like my context on Jason, like why
Oh,
I thought
yeah,
it'd be good to have to to share his story as well.
please.
Because I was thinking about this in the context of the podcast as well. Like, why bother doing a podcast? Like, is it just me hanging out with Charlie and our friends, or is there like an audience, a specific audience for this podcast that is not served by other podcasts?
Hmm.
And I think there is. And where it comes down to it at its core is that this audience, you who are listening, these people are people who are thoughtful about their continuing education, usually in computer science and like adjacent technical areas. And they're thoughtful about it in three ways. Tactical, like what do I put on my Anki cards or whatever? Strategic, like what are my multi-month goals and how do I work towards them consistently? That's quite different to what do I put on my Anki cards, although like connected, like there's a bridge there. You need to decide what are my longer term goals. Otherwise, you don't know what to put on your Anki, what to do kind of day to day. But then there's also this thing that's like self-understanding or like in the context of product. where you're distinguishing it from tactics and strategy. It's like kind of vision, like what's the product vision or something.
Mm,
So it's like, who am I? How do I fit into the world? What
mm,
are my goals? Like in a very long term way, not just my strategic goals, like get into a FANG company or whatever,
mm,
but like what is going to bring me fulfillment or like self-actualization.
mm,
And these things all work together. And like I know that there are podcasts and resources and whatever out there that are about like the art of learning, but it comes into this narrow part of that spectrum, some narrow part of that spectrum of like, what are the tactical ways that I can like, I'm learning to learn. Am I learning to learn particular, narrow techniques for learning? I think we're trying to like bridge all these things. And
cool.
Jason to me exemplifies this
Mm,
because he is thoughtful about day-to-day tactics. He does strive to fit them into his like week to week, month to month strategies. And he is not afraid to question and like radically change his plans around his like longer term self understanding. Is that a reasonable characterization of you, Jason?
yeah, I think it's reasonable, yeah, and
Okay.
flattering. It took a long time of you twisting my arm for me to take computer science seriously, though. So, sometimes I'm stubborn, but yeah. Um, so yeah, over the last 10 years, and there's another caveat here too, which is like, if 10 years ago I had foreseen the extent of curriculum pursuing and like learning that I would end up doing over these last 10 years, I probably would have been intimidated and given up early.
Mm.
And so there's some important piece of this, which is um, you are doing a bit of a novelty search. And so your curriculum, which is a very powerful tool, and I plan those with the help of industry insiders, which is very helpful. There's a specific way I do that, which is maybe useful to share tactically, but the curriculum I plan are always less than a year in scope, um, usually more like 3 to 6 months. Um, and then I just end up doing them over and over again and making more. At this point, I've done one, I'm looking at a web page I wrote about this, but 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm on my fifth like coherent curriculum that was like less than 6 months in scope. And I think I'm really lucky in my career because very early on, I learned by going to Dev Bootcamp that, oh, wow, I can make a huge difference in my like skill set in a relatively short period, like 3 to 5 months. And that will have huge positive impacts on my life circumstances. And so when I was 23, I learned like a very tight feedback loop between like if I invest in self-improvement intensely for a short period of time, less than 6 months, my life gets immediately much better. And so I've been kind of repeatedly doing that ever since.
So
What
your
are those
life wasn't
five?
great previously, as a spreadsheet I won't say anything pejorative, but like
It was
as a
terrible,
spreadsheet
dude.
worker.
Yeah, finance for like a year and a half out of college with an econ degree was miserable. And I
Yeah,
immediately hated it
same.
like I would. Yeah, you get it.
I do.
Was it a story that you automated a whole day of your work by like hacking together scripts and then you were like
Yeah, in Excel you can record a macro and it just watches your screen and it generates a script in Visual Basic. And so I cobbled together a script from many macros and it automated my Fridays. And I peaked like a month in doing that. And the rest of my time there, I was like just struggling to not be on Reddit 75% of my day. It's
So
miserable.
Jason, what were those five transformations that you've gone through? And like this is on video, so we could even pull up your website if you wanted to just visually show us.
Yeah, sure. Let me
Yeah.
share screen then.
Okay.
That'd be easier. Um, okay, wait a minute. No, here we go. Um, Web dev curriculum. This was pre-dev bootcamp and then dev bootcamp. That was 2013. 2016 through 2019 was computer science with Oz.
Yep.
That was like pre-Bradfield and then Bradfield. Um, After Bradfield, I was like, well, how do I continue to become more useful to the jobs marketplace? This is me following the heuristic that Cal Newport lays out for navigating a career in So Good They Can Ignore You, which is just maximize your usefulness to the job market, use that to accumulate career capital, trade that career capital for the things we know are associated with like happy careers that are fulfilling, which are autonomy to choose your projects, a sense of mastery, right? Like a skill you're really good at, and connectedness to purpose, which is usually like proximity to the people you're actually helping. And that totally worked out for me. You know, as the more useful I became, the more I was able to like go get the jobs that I wanted, which included all of those autonomy, mastery, and purpose qualities. And so continuing to be useful after completing Oz's curriculum, more or less, was learning machine learning in 2017. And so with two other Bradfield graduates, James Vanneman and Tiger Shen, we formed a paper club that met every week for about 3 years. Now, in the beginning, it was just going to be like we meet every week and review a paper together, but we enjoyed hanging out so much that we just kept doing it. And then I joined South Park Commons and developed a curriculum. And the curriculum I developed then was like, because it was so unknown, this field of machine learning, I basically drafted a list of topics and got feedback on the topics from folks on the inside of the industry. And then once I had my list of topics dialed in, then I would draft particular resources for each topic that were like good, and then I would get feedback on those resources. And folks would be like, you don't need to do like chapters 4 through 7 of this, and like use this textbook instead of that, and this course is bad, etc. Then I got a job as a machine learning engineer at a company called Sorceress. We're doing like NLP on resumes. And once I was in there, I developed my own NLP systems curriculum with the help of, again, insiders, and that was more relevant to my job then. And now I'm doing another version of this, which is kind of like Recurse Center for AI. And for here, I'm again doing a curriculum around like modern research engineering. And so this has been really fun too. But yeah, that's the TLDR.
We definitely want to talk about that, but one thing that struck me on that last page was the column C, the emotions.
Yeah.
Tell us more. Tell us more about, is that the beginning of the period or the end of the period or the summation? Walk us through that.
I would say it's the overall characterizing of the period.
Okay.
So a lot of times when there's frustration, it's because I'm sensing that I'm not growing or doing a curriculum that's not worthwhile. And I think the epiphany was like, okay, wow, computer science is the key. This is like a useful skill for me. This is how I become a really solid engineer in all aspects of it, which had been I just didn't see how to do that before.
Have you ever gone back and reclassified a period with rose tinted glasses that maybe I was wrong about this?
Well, when I wrote this, it was like looking retrospectively at all this stuff.
Okay.
I don't really think so. I mean, definitely, sometimes you're on sabbatical. Like navigating ambiguity on sabbatical is like just a fundamentally emotionally uncomfortable experience. Like being uncertain and staying in that uncertainty for a long time is pretty uncomfortable. And sometimes when you're on sabbatical, the purpose is to navigate ambiguity using like novelty heuristic, for example, is a good algorithm for doing that, right? You're just collecting stepping stones of things you're curious about and trusting that, like having faith essentially that that process will lead you somewhere interesting, even if you can't see it in advance. And that's the other main career heuristic I've followed, aside from Cal Newport's, and that one comes from, what's it called? Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. And that's by two AI researchers basically, and they use an AI. They basically like adapt novelty search, which is like a useful exploration algorithm from machine learning, to your career, and that's worked for me too. And that's what led to the neighborhood actually, which is what I did for the last 3 years before MLE Club. So yeah, the advantage of building a curriculum is that you can remove some of the uncertainty of am I spending my time well, because it's been vetted by folks that you trust. So a lot of the emotional differences are because I either had a curriculum or I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting for me to consider all these emotions as well, because I think that, well, I'll ask, if you could like bestow one of these emotions on somebody who you care for, who you like, you want to improve their life in some meaningful way, and they're in a situation that you want them to like, I don't know, embrace, make the most of,
Yeah.
which is the one that you give them? Or alternatively, they're in a bad situation and you're trying to encourage them to get out, which is the one. I think it's kind of subtle here.
Um, you know, during Dev Bootcamp, I was kind of single-minded, so the emotion I put was obsessed.
That's
And
the one that I'm drawn to. Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah, like,
advantage,
you know, as opposed to amazed or challenged or
yeah,
whatever. It's like when someone is obsessed, they learn so much.
yeah, it's
They make so
crazy.
much progress.
I've never felt that rate of improvement before or since. And the thing that made the difference was my environment, actually. There was
Mhm.
nothing else I had to do besides attend and study, like attend Dev Bootcamp and study. Like I was eating, sleeping, and breathing code, and I was surrounded by people doing the same thing. And the reason for that is it was located in Chicago, and I moved there for the 3 months from DC, and afterwards I left to go to San Francisco to find a job. And so I had nothing else holding me to that city except learning programming.
Hmm.
And so, in my sabbaticals since, I've tried recreating that experience to not as much success because I'm like, I live in San Francisco and I have for 12 years and I have friends here. And I'm consistently annoyed at how distracted my life is unavoidably because I love hanging out with my friends.
I was about to ask, like, how do you burn the boats? Like, how do you recreate that kind of sense of commitment? And
It's really hard. But knowing myself, creating communities around my learning goals, like I did with Paper Club for those 3 years, or with MLE Club, like I'm doing now, is like the key thing that helps me spend more of my time thinking about it and making faster progress.
Yeah,
so
if your
what aspect
friends,
of sorry,
I was just to say, if your friends are equally obsessed, then I think you get that experience. It seems that that's what you're doing because I'm wondering some of these did have that group cohort based things. Some of them might be more self-directed, but it seems like at least now with the recent turn back MLE Club, you're very much making it a small, tight-knit group of people. And
Yeah.
that feels pretty intentional.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, the group is today is actually the 1 month anniversary of founding MLE Club, and we are now like 12 people, I think. So it's just like it's really nice working with, and I count you here as well, Oz. You're joining Q1. So that's great. And Elliot Jin is also a part of it too. Elliot was one of the instructors at Bradfield. And so he comes in and he works on his like real analysis textbook problems like he's been doing for the last couple of months. He's our like resident math expert. Epic, very inspiring. Um, yeah, it's been really great. It's really great working with a strong tailwind like AI rather than working into a headwind like I was doing for a while before this, like real estate in San Francisco. That's hard. And this is like by comparison so much easier to put together. Difference is hilarious.
so what is the successful outcome of this period for you, Jason? Like when we talk about that, the strategy component of
Um,
your thinking of your learning.
yeah, well, it's evolving. I mean, originally this was a strategy for holding myself accountable to making consistent progress so that um, basically I could transition back into ML engineering after like 3 years running a nonprofit that was mostly about real estate and only like 10% involved programming. Um, and so rehydrating my computer science and machine learning skills was initially the reason, but um, it took on momentum of its own. And I think I am realizing that like maybe we should be interested in more like novel results and research and like new projects. Um, there's like two insights that lead to this. One is learning and research are kind of on the same continuum. Like learning is asking a question, a good question, and figuring out a way to answer it. And research is that, except you're asking a question that no one's ever answered before. Okay, so like they're fundamentally very similar activities, actually. And the second insight is that to get a job as a research engineer down the road, especially at a place that's very competitive like Anthropic, the best way to stand out is not via realistic side projects like at a regular tech company, but actually via novel results that catch the attention of folks on the inside. And that looks like research too. Um, and meanwhile, there are lots of folks in the industry that are down to like come and basically be like research PIs for us and like help us identify projects and rate our project ideas. And so I think MLE Club has evolved from like, okay, I'm gonna cover like the Andre Carpathia, LLM 101 and course, or like I'm gonna implement like 5 papers, um, to okay, we're gonna try and push the bounds here somewhere, and we're gonna like as a group try and like come up with a new eval or like train ImageNet in under a minute, that kind of thing.
So this is kind of at the scope of like a grad student's contribution to the field,
Yeah, yeah.
except you're self-organizing. You're not a part of a university. What I'm curious about is like, why is it that senior people in the industry want to come and help you out and like feed you ideas and stuff?
Oh, I mean, everyone is helping. Oh, senior people in the industry, why do they want to help us out? I
Yeah, I mean, a question I get all the time is like, how do I find mentorship? And like,
Yeah.
there's all this unwritten, unspoken stuff, wisdom from other people. Like, how do I tap into that? How do you tap into that, do you think?
Well, I think um I think it's really helpful to like talk to people like this and understand what they're afraid of, like what would hold them back from helping, and then mitigate those fears. The biggest one is they're afraid of a longer term commitment that they probably don't have time for. And so if the ask is, hey, do you want to come in and hang out with us, next Wednesday for a couple hours and just like work from home but alongside us, maybe you can like it would just be fun to hang, right? And they're a friend of mine, and so that also helps. But making it very explicit that this is not like a longer term commitment to like be a research PI for a group, that helps a lot. That's like a main fear. Um, I think also they generally think this kind of thing is cool, and there's a lot of projects that maybe they don't have the bandwidth to pursue that they think would be useful. They're more than happy to talk about things like they would love to see someone identify new capabilities in O1. Um, or they would love to see folks build more evals, right, and make those open source. It turns out actually that the founding of Google Brain, this was told to me by one of these industry folks. The founding of Google Brain in the beginning actually kind of looked like this accidentally, which is it was roughly 70% engineers, 20% researchers, and 10% specialists. So in our case, we've got Elliot doing math and a guy who just joined yesterday who isn't listed on here yet, named Mike, who's like a GPU specialist.
Yeah, how is this not what OpenAI was meant to be in the first place? This,
Well, OpenAI's goals were a lot more ambitious than
uh,
ours.
well, right now.
It's 1 month old. I don't know where it will go, but over the last 2 weeks, I've become convinced pushing it in more of a researchy direction is actually best aligned with most people's goals, which are still, get jobs as research engineers and ML engineers in industry doing something really cool.
Maybe this is on Oz's number three, that self-understanding pillar of this, but why go back to MLE land and not, just more generic distributed systems or databases? What's drawing you back there? I know that the job market's interesting. There's definitely a frontier of computing and it coalescing with things that people do in the real world, but what's driving you back to the ML landscape?
It's obviously a fascinating time to be in AI. Um, all my friends in AI think that they're doing the most important work of their career at possibly the most important hinge in human history. And
Hmm.
so that kind of talk is, even with a grain of salt, a little intoxicating.
Hmm.
But also, it just happens to be some of the most interesting distributed systems and like large scale computing work, right? Like they are heavily bottlenecked both in training and at inference on like computer systems people that are really good.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting challenges to handle when you're like orchestrating 16,000 H100 GPUs. Like you have to take into account like the topology of GPUs in your data center, like physically, when you're accounting for how to spread the neural net load across that. And that's just fascinating.
Oz, what drew you to join this? I am kind of surprised, Oz, that you've committed to a 3 to 6 month ML focused excursion, other than
Is that
hanging
what
out
I'm
with
committed to,
Jason.
Jason?
No, no, no. Oz is not a full-time person.
Okay, okay.
I'd say like half or two-thirds of these are like more than 3 times a week.
Can I'm happy to be honest here. I'm on a little bit of pain medication right now, so maybe I'll say things that we'll have to edit out afterwards.
No, there's no editing. There's no editing. Sorry, I don't know how to do it.
Um, yeah, I mean, like my focus is obviously CS Primer right now. I think once my like primary scope is out there, I'll continue with that. I'll keep adding videos and experiment with different modes of teaching asynchronously like that. But I just really missed having a juicy technical problem to
Hmm.
work on, particularly with kids. This
Hmm.
is the bit that it's like maybe if I weren't on pain med, I wouldn't say this. But when you've got kids and when you're looking after kids, like sometimes you get a lot and they get a lot through being super engaged with them, like, right in their face, eye contact, in their game, whatever. And other times they want to play by themselves, they're happy to play by themselves, they don't want you there, but you kind of need to still supervise. And that is the best time to have a juicy problem to work on in your head. Anyway, there are moments in the day where it's like, well, I can't sit down at my desk. I would love to be like using this idle CPU right now. And so I've been trying to do that with like
Cool.
recreational math problems and stuff, and that's fun. But I think machine learning is really good for this kind of like, I mean, I'm talking about a hobby, right? Like a side interest in tinkering with machine learning for fun. And it's good because like you can go and set up a training run and come back later and then you get some result and then you like it's worth it to think about it away from the computer for a day to come up with an idea and then come and implement it.
It's
And
actually so fun that things take a long time because so much of computing is so instant now. Like even just doing whisper transcriptions of these previous episodes, I'd like walk away from my computer and come back. It's like, okay, you're doing it. Good job. And it harkens back to, I mean, way back in computing. But I do love that I have this cute little machine doing things.
yeah, if it were my job, it'd be frustrating and I'd be like, how can I
Yeah.
parallelize this? And like, I'll just get better compute resources. Whereas now it's like, oh, well, I'll just think about it for a while and, that'll be my thing to think about for a while. And I'll come back and try an idea and, get a 1% improvement or something. So that's a major part
Yeah.
of it. Another part is that like, obviously there's something here and there's something actually attractive to me about the fact that some people I feel like are over optimistic. Some people are overly dismissive. And so there's just this like fun kind of complex, like a multi-dimensional space where it's like, well, people are going to be right about some things and wrong about some other things. And that gives me some room to like make predictions and play around and see what happens and be rewarded for being right about some things and, you know, punished for being wrong about something. Yeah, that just makes it a kind of interesting field overall. But
There are some interesting trends worth keeping track of here. Epoch AI is a really good think tank that makes very data-driven predictions about scaling laws for AI, and they predict that um, scaling up existing techniques will continue through 2030. Um, and then the more recent, this O1 model is not, it's not an improvement brought about by like training a larger model on more tokens of text. Um, and it's not an improvement from going multimodal like Gemini or Sora. It's an improvement from like longer time spent thinking at inference. And so I think an interesting thing you're going to see in AI land over the next like, years, starting now, is where before we were bottlenecked on video memory at training time. I think in the future we're going to be bottlenecked on like GPU compute at inference time because models are just going to spend more and more time thinking before responding. And that scales really nicely for potentially a long time. So all of which is to say, like, AI is not done yet, and it's already like winning math Olympiads.
Yeah.
So
Or making very believable podcast episodes, which by the way is so awesome. You guys have obviously done that, right? The Notebook LM thing.
I haven't done it, but I've seen it on Twitter.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's obviously all over, but for me, I'm thinking this is a great way, as you're talking about the like background processing cycle when you're watching kids. There's plenty of programming books where I have the PDFs and I want to listen to this chapter. You can fling it over to this thing, and then you have two, um, hilarious little fake podcast hosts talking about what I wish I could sit down and watch the YouTube video for. So I'm hopeful this will be my key to reinvigorate some of my own extracurricular learning.
It's rad because sometimes you don't know exactly what questions you want to ask about something.
Mm.
And so having the mock interviewer think of them for you and then have them answered is good.
Actually, Oz, you had hinted at this in the beginning in terms of the AI powered tutor, and it sounded like you and Jason might have different opinions on that.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do you want me to put my cards on the table first?
please.
Yeah, please do.
So I think that most people underestimate the complexity of the dynamic of an individual learning something. And so they like mistake some of the affects of tutoring for effective learning. So if they see an LLM generate output that looks instructive in some form that they're pattern matching to other instruction, they think that this is very close to being good tutoring. But then when I really try to prompt an LLM to be interrogative in a way that good tutors are, I think it falls short in pretty critical ways. And but I also see why someone who hasn't experienced very good tutoring, who maybe has spent most of their educational experience in a lecture kind of environment or like watching YouTube videos or something, may not see the difference. So when I see people who tutor try to replicate themselves or good tutoring in the LLM format, they see like particularly when there's like a violation of your expectations of quality, like what should be the next question asked or something, it's really undermining. And so if it gets it right for like 90% of the time, and then there's this really bad, misleading a question that's asked or incorrect
Mm,
direction or something, you're
mm,
like, well, that undermines everything else as well. I mean, it's the same with humans, right? If you're in a class, and this like is something I'm conscious of in teaching as well. When you're in a class and the teacher tells you something wrong with confidence,
mm.
then that undermines the whole class, maybe the whole course. If the teacher's like, I don't really know, I'm not sure, I'll look into that, that's fine. But
Yeah,
when the teacher says something confidently wrong, then you're like, well, what else that we were
Mm.
talking about were you wrong about? Or a similar
yeah.
thing, if the like maybe this is the more critical piece of it. And sorry, I'll let you
I see a
present
couple
your case,
cruxes already,
James.
but keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what a good teacher is doing is forming a model in their minds of the individual, what they understand right now, what they're misunderstanding right now, and they can like form this this perfectly interrogative question to update the teacher's model of the student's understanding. And through this back and forth, you can uncover like multi-year misunderstandings that the students have had, like things
Mm,
that they fundamentally got wrong in
mm,
elementary school or something about algebra or something.
mm.
And it seems unrelated, but through this like interrogation of the mental model, you can get that kind of like, what people expect therapists to do.
Yeah.
And that's like nowhere near the capabilities of an LLM. But if like all that's to say, I think that the human tutor experience tries to capture the complexity of the individual in society, trying
Yeah.
to understand something that, like, I'm not saying I'd be surprised if that never happens. I'd just be surprised if that happens sooner than all of these other things that we expect LLMs to do, that they're making progress on. So
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you brought up timelines at the end there because whenever people talk about AI capabilities, it's like, okay, but when are we talking about here? Like over what horizon within the scaling between now and 6 years from now in 2030? Like how many years do you think it will take before? Well, first of all, you're talking about ChatGPT now, and I fully agree. Like ChatGPT, right? You're talking about ChatGPT?
Or other like comparable LLMs. Sure. I mean, I've tried the same kind of
Yeah.
prompts on Claude and so on.
Yeah. So, with the caveat that we're not yet being precise about like what year we're talking about, um, ChatGPT and Claude were both trained with reinforcement learning with human feedback. And both of those, so basically what that means is um, after training, um, human raters generated pairs of outputs um, where, and then the correct, and then they like basically indicated which of the two comparable outputs was more helpful, honest, and harmless. Um, and these pairs and answers were used to train a reward model, which was then used as part of reinforcement learning to train the model further to like output things that were, according to the reward model, most helpful, honest, and harmless. And so um, if you instead were building a tutor bot, then you would take the same base model that's not public or open weights, and you would train a reward model that was optimizing for interrogativeness, right? And then you would get a very different result for that like tutor GPT that I presume would be better. And this is one of the reasons why it's actually difficult to like even prompt ChatGPT to be like good Socratic tutor.
Yeah, Socratic, I'm glad you said that word because I don't know if you've experienced a teacher trying to be Socratic who's not good at it.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that?
I've never had that experience, Oz.
Thank you. Good answer. No, I mean some people are like they know they ought to ask questions. Uh and don't ask good ones.
Yeah.
And that can also be bad. So like even like identifying in a particular situation, what is the what is the right response? I mean, I totally agree with you for like the current generations definitely uh being rewarded for giving answers where education is not about giving answers. And I think this is where a lot of the people who are hyped up about AI in education are totally wrong about education. They
Yeah.
like think it's all about getting the answers as quickly as possible,
Yeah.
and that's more or less the opposite. I think
Yeah.
of good education is about getting good challenges, the well calibrated, like back to your emotional experience during certain periods of time. It's like calibrated to give the right kind of experience to the student, but not frustrating, not boring, not too
Yeah.
challenging. It's like the questions, the challenge. Anyway, so that's like that's on the horizon, but it's also like how far on the horizon to our question. And this is where I get back to the complexity of it. Like one way that I think about it is that education is our attempt to capture all of culture and pass it down to the next generation. And so it's as complex as our culture. It's like if someone was born in the woods and raised by wolves, they are, that's our baseline.
Mm,
Someone born in our society and raised by people, that's what we get with education. The difference between those two captures so much complexity.
mm.
Like the individual, their parents, their surroundings, their nutrition, their like
Yeah.
their educational experience in school and stuff. That's so much. There's so many parameters there. And so that's why education is so hard, I think, because the teacher needs to have this model of this individual and who they are and how they're feeling and what they've learned previously. And when they ask a question, do they really mean that? Or is there something else? And like, what is their, it's hard for me to teach. Like if I had to teach by text, for instance, and I couldn't see someone's face,
Mm.
I've lost so much of my ability to teach.
So you're
Yeah.
not we're not ready for those. I know Aj, you don't watch sci-fi, but in Vulcan, where Spock learned, they're in those learning pods, and it's like I can imagine some GPT perfectly trained on Vulcan society that you're effectively growing up in a vacuum, but you emerge as a competent Vulcan society member.
Look, I think that there are narrow fields, highly legible fields where you can kind of codify the scope of people's potential misunderstanding. And so you're mapping this very high dimensional space onto something that's much lower dimensionality. And anyone who tries to write a textbook is doing exactly this, right? You like now you can't interrogate the person anymore other than by like just throwing out like questions or something in your prose or adding exercises at the end. It's like that's also a naive attempt at trying to capture that complexity. But it's like if you make it highly legible, it's like abstract algebra for people who have taken whatever prior courses and like here's your then it becomes a little bit more straightforward. I think if you make it super narrow and well understood, like learn the most common, 1,000 Chinese characters or something. Like now you're squishing the like, or you're narrowing the scope enough that your guesses about why people might be wrong and what intervention to make are better. But this to me is not the value of the tutor. Uh, so like using AI as like more interactive course materials for like a narrower portion of your educational experience. This to me is a smaller claim, and I think like an exciting one, honestly, to pursue, to consider. But in the scope of like, if you're sitting down with a human expert and they're really trying to help you make substantial progress, it's gonna feel very different to an LLM,
I would like to,
current or
I have a
near-term.
proposal. I think we should adjust the frame of this conversation slightly to make it easier to talk about, which is there's a Turkish economist who's going to get a Nobel someday named Darren Acemoglu. And when he talks about,
Acemoglu, I think.
sorry,
Acemoglu.
Akemoglu?
Acemoglu is how you'd say it in Turkish.
Acemoglu. Oh, right, you're Turkish. I forgot. Cool. So your countryman, Darren, basically said, look, the debate about AI automation is misguided. It's not about like replacing jobs as a whole. It's actually more fruitful to think of jobs as a bundle of tasks, and some of those tasks are specialized currently into capital, like AIs or other kinds of like, I don't know, infrastructure, in this case, technology, or to humans, right? And so the shift of like specialized tasks to AI shifts with technological progress. And so even if AI is better than humans at all tasks, because of how comparative advantage works, there will still be some tasks where humans will still be specialized to doing them in a comparative advantage sense, even if the AI is like better at those things individually. And I think comparative advantage will hold for a long time. Um, and so I think uh, it's useful to talk about what kinds of tasks are involved in tutoring that are already specialized or specializable to AI, and what that like sort of wave of progress, what that wave of change looks like over the next several years. And it's also useful to think about what are the kinds of things that human tutors will specialize in doing compared to AIs for a very long time, because I think that there will be some of those things. And I think obviously like a relationship that feels meaningful, or like mentorship, or like helping someone chart out like a good sequence of projects, or like connecting them to people where they can build a learning community together. Like, I think those kinds of more human aspects to education will be specialized to humans for a long time.
Can I derail us back into the tactical?
Yeah,
How are you using LLMs now for MLE Club that's different from one of your sabbaticals in 2019?
right. I built a little GPT that one of my theories going into this next era is that generalists that understand all aspects of the ML engineering stack are going to be useful, because you can dispatch agents to help you write code and fix bugs across little pieces of the stack. But like, if you have an understanding of everything from the math and the science down to the computer systems, down to like, engineering and like jumping into assembly or like CUDA where needed. And I think that person will be able to see opportunities that others wouldn't, where it wouldn't be practical to be that specialized across so many things before. Um, and so I have a little bot that keeps all of that knowledge fresh by asking me random questions across all the Bradfield computer science curricula and a whole bunch of like papers that I claim to know or understand. And the way it does that is um, it's a GPT, and it has tool use, and the tool basically hits a small server endpoint I set up where the endpoint just returns a random sequence, like a random,
Anki cards.
no, not Anki cards. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a random slice of 1,000 words chosen at random from that corpus that I claim to know. Um, and then it asks me quiz questions inspired by that content. And so it complements Anki. Like Anki is good for building, like really being really rock solid on like concrete facts, but that knowledge is kind of like siloed and brittle. And this is a lot more of the transfer learning aspect. Like, can I jump across the stack and answer like very detailed questions about like a query planner in a database or like
And when you answer it,
quantization
are
training?
you answering it verbally? And is it actually giving you the correct answer? Because every time I ask Claude anything or I add something to it, it's like, you're absolutely right. And I could be totally wrong. So how are you getting the right answer?
This is another crux, I think, between you guys and me, maybe, which is like, yes, there are some hallucinations going on right now. I think that we'll mostly solve those with scale as we have been over the last several years. And I think that even a model that's like 90% correct, 10% hallucinating, is still useful because you're still thinking hard through the problem. Um, and so even if the answers are slightly misguiding some of the time, it's like still net positive. So I do use these conversationally. I do it on my commute to and from the office.
But are you checking your own work or are you relying on the LLM to say you were right or wrong?
Um, Sometimes I recognize the flaw and other times it slips by me, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not as worried about it.
Hmm.
Do you see this as something that just like is an additional thing that fits into the gaps? Like, presumably, if you could have a human, like you sit next to Elliot at MLE Club, you could have him quiz you.
Mm.
Like, how do you see this as like fitting in with your other like
Yeah, they're
sources
complementary.
of prompting or sources of challenging?
They're complementary. I mean, the big advantage is I could do this every day as long as I want, and Elliot, I have to respect his time, right? Um, it's like there are AI therapy bots, and it's actually, as it turns out, really nice to have on-demand access to them and not worry about rudely using too much of their time. And you still want like a real therapist.
Hmm.
Tutoring is the same way.
I keep thinking of a little baby Oz on CS Primer that I can ask the questions I'm too embarrassed to really ask Oz.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, when GPTs were starting to take off, that's something that I like considered as an ultimate point that we might get to with CS Primer. And I started experimenting firstly with totally behind the scenes um, prompts for student submissions. So like I manually do code review of student submissions on CS Primer. And so obviously like the first thing to consider was like, should we feed this through an LLM and have it do code review and not give that back to the student, but have that help me like as a kind of first pass. And if it's good, then maybe like for some category of those I'll give back. And then maybe over time, it can be a kind of back and forth thing that like is more scalable than me and my time. But I just like maybe I should invest more time in trying to improve it. But at the moment, the feedback that GPT-4 or something would give back to a student is not helpful. It is helpful for me to pick up on bugs more expeditiously. So I can do a first pass that is kind of like an ultra, like a kind of semantic linter, which is fantastic because otherwise I would have to spend a lot of time going line by line looking for off by one errors and things like that. And the cost of having a false positive there is no big deal because I could be like, oh, that's actually not a bug. You didn't know that
Mm.
there's this other context. But that's just for me. That
Well, Oz,
is not.
What is Conmigo doing on Khan Academy? Because isn't that live with students right now?
I think it's terrible.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's just not very good. I think they are actually deluded about this being good instruction.
Hmm.
Like just quite frankly deluded about it being good instruction. I think there's a kind of optimism around AI tutors right now that is allowing some people in education to delude themselves about the effectiveness of the technology.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
When do you,
Look, I want Jason, I want to be clear. I'm psyched about this. And I really do legitimately think that those Notebook LM podcast hosts are going to be the key to me, like actually picking up some of these textbooks and learning again right now. Even if they're hallucinating, you're right. Like 90%, 80%, that's better than zero, which is happening right now.
Totally.
Yeah.
And
I
I
think
feel
if
like,
that's substituting, Charlie, for you like really engaging with something, then that's problematic. If it's something that is like, oh, the best that you can do right now because you know, just want something to like get you excited about a topic again, that's
Yeah.
good. But like people at the moment, people who take Coursera courses and watch the videos of the Coursera course are uh, uh generally speaking, I think doing themselves a disservice because that's allowing themselves to get around the hard work of engaging with something and doing the problem. Right. So there's been this genre, again, people deluding themselves about the effectiveness of the educational intervention of like highly entertaining consumption-based educational resources, which if you see that as fitting in somewhere and you're disciplined about like what you're getting out of this resource, that's good. I encourage in that context. Right. If you're like, oh, I'm listening to this podcast that's just chatty, like this podcast right now, that's just chatty because it might like motivate me or something, and like there's nothing else that I'm doing in that time or something, then that's fine. But it's like it's to me the bombastic talk about like, oh, the future of Khan Academy is through Codmigo or something. It's like, have you tried have you tried it? Have you tried learning something through this? It's like this is not how people learn.
yeah, the most important thing really is like, is the student mentally wrestling with the content in a way that's fruitful? And or even just mentally wrestling full stop, right? That is what learning requires. And if AIs enable people to circumvent having to think hard about any problem because they can do a passable, solution, then that's bad. But that's always been the case, I think, or like it's always been the case that edutainment has made people feel more productive than they actually are, or that they're like reading a textbook without ever working the problems and then they feel like they're learning, but they're not. And so
That hits hard.
we're
Edutainment
expanding the
hits hard.
category of edutainment here.
Yeah. I think I'm a
Nothing new.
big fan of edutainment.
Yeah.
That's why I need to read more of your tactical reports. I feel so bad I have to go right now because I feel like we're really getting into it. We should
All
have you
right.
back. I have this dumb, Oz and I were talking about like a recurring segment of
Yeah.
pulling up Hacker News and seeing what everyone would read. Do we do that? Oz, do you want to pull up
Yeah,
Hacker
let's put
News?
Jason on the spot if you've
Yeah.
got time, Charlie.
Yeah, I do.
Sure.
So Jason, all you're gonna do, you're gonna share your screen,
I
pull
can't
up
pull up
the
Hacker News. It's blocked right now. That's
Oh,
oh no.
day.
dang.
So when do you
That
guys have
maybe
to
isn't
share?
that maybe is an answer in itself, huh?
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Let me see if
Charlie,
I
what's
have no idea
your
what's on
yeah,
Hacker
let me
News.
get it. Let me get it. Sharing. Beautiful. All right. Where's your head at, Jason? What are you looking at? What are you upvoting?
Well, the top three are all about AI. Okay. Canvas is a new way to write and code with ChatGPT. I saw a thread about this on Twitter and it looks good. The thing that stands out about this to me is it is a lot like the artifacts browser that Anthropic released recently, except the interactions with the browser. It basically like Canvas elements sort of fluidly pop in and out of the conversation, which is cool. Anyway, I don't know if this title would have grabbed me,
Hmm,
but knowing what it is, I find it fascinating.
cool.
Were RNNs all we needed?
Isn't the statement that anytime a question is the title of an article like that, the
Yeah,
answer is just always no?
I mean, kind of no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Okay. I love that.
Interesting.
I just love that you have this blocked. So I'm sorry I feel like we've just kind of ruined your entire
No, it's
your
chill.
day.
I liked it. I like
Okay.
it. The serving 70 bill llama on low resource edge devices looked interesting.
Okay.
Like I'm curious as to how they pulled that off. That's like a good combo of AI and systems knowledge. Clearly done by like independent researchers like us who don't have a lot of compute to play with for
Great.
now.
Okay, I got to run. Jason, hopefully I get to chat again with you sooner than 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah, this is really fun.
Come hang.
Okay, absolutely. Oz, feel better.
thank you. Sorry
Okay,
about
Thanks,
the
guys.
folks.
Yeah.
thank you.
See you,
Bye.
Jason.